The Hori Steam Controller, retailing for $59.99, for use on Windows PCs, and of course, the Steam Deck. In the box, you get a controller, a USB cable, and a USB dongle. Interestingly, the dongle is a Bluetooth dongle, not a 2.4 GHz dongle. The controller itself uses an Xbox-style layout, being asymmetrical with its sticks. It does have an extra button on its face for opening up the Steam Deck overlay. There are 4 assignable buttons, 2 on the back of the controller, and 2 beneath the D-pad and right analog stick. This controller is gyro compatible, and its R2 and L2 triggers can be set to analog or digital mode. And if you're looking to use this controller with something other than a Steam game, you can set it to X input mode, but there are several caveats that come with that. Battery life is approximately 12 hours, and there is no rumble of any kind. When using the controller in Steam mode, you will get very familiar with Steam's controller settings. Going into this menu allows you to set up this controller completely differently for every game in your Steam library, allowing you not to just assign the 4 extra buttons on this controller, but to assign every button on this controller. And the options for what you can assign a button to do are staggering, as it can function as any other button on the controller, or a mouse button, or a keystroke on your keyboard, or even a command to start recording, or to turn your mic on and off, or literally dozens of other things. You can also turn the gyro on or off, as well as deciding what it actually corresponds to. If you do nothing at all, the controller will usually behave as a standard X input controller. Keyword there is usually. You're going to want to open up the controller settings before you play a game with this controller. Now, if that sounds like too much work for you, you do have the option of using this controller in X input mode. However, that's less than ideal, as many features of the controller do not work in X input mode. Firstly, to use X input mode, you have to use the controller wired. Wireless will not work. Depending on your personal setup, that may or may not be an issue. Secondly, the 4 assignable buttons do nothing. In X input mode, you cannot assign them. Lastly, the gyro will not be available to you, as that's not something associated with X input in general. Truthfully, the only reason you might want to put this controller into X input mode is if you are playing something not on Steam, such as a free game you got off the Epic Game Store. So those are your options for using the controller. But how is the actual quality of the product? Well, my first impression is that this controller is incredibly light. I assume this is because of the lack of rumble, as rumble motors do add a lot of weight. The controller fit my hands comfortably, and did a good job playing Elden Ring. Footage of me playing Elden Ring with this has been used throughout. The sticks are smooth, and the buttons feel pretty good for the most part. My only complaint with any of the buttons are in fact the L2 and R2 triggers, as these can be set to either analog or digital mode. But this seems completely pointless, as there is so very minimal travel on these triggers, making me wonder what the point of this option even is. Now, I did want to test everything on this controller. For an overall test, I used Elden Ring, as you've been seeing. To test the gyro, I played some Borderlands 3, and it did take me a little while to figure out how to get the gyro working. I didn't realize you had to turn it on in the controller settings. That's on me, not the controller. Using the gyro was a little bit of an adjustment, but once I got the hang of it, it was more efficient than using the right stick for aiming, and actually exceeded my expectations for how well it would work. The last thing I wanted to test on this controller was the D-pad, which are far too often treated as an afterthought on modern controllers. So I tested it in 2 ways. First, with some Street Fighter Alpha 2. Dan is the only character worth picking. And then loaded up the Castlevania Advance Collection, where it did a fine job in a classic Metroidvania. So, do I actually recommend the Hori Steam controller? That really depends. If you're looking to use it with a Steam Deck when you're docked, this is a fine controller to use, as it will give you most of what's available on the actual Steam Deck, except of course for the touchpads. But if you're looking for something for your PC, unless you're exclusively using the Steam Store, there are better options available to you at that same $60 price point, most of which will share a lot of the features here, such as assignable buttons, and also have other features like Hall effect sticks, and many of those options will actually come in cheaper than the $60 the Hori Steam controller goes for. So overall, no, I do not recommend the Hori Steam controller for the average user. I would only recommend it to someone who is exclusive to Steam or using a Steam Deck. Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends.